Good morning, students. In this class, I'll be discussing the essay A Vindication of Isaac Bickerstaff by Jonathan Swift. So, first of all, let me tell you about the context of this essay. During the 17th century, in England, there was this raging market for almanacs. They had this craze for predictions and astrology. And Church of England particularly had reservations against this art or what they call as science. Church generally treated clairvoyance as completely anti-Christian. And almanac writing was a big business during that time. And the authors of these almanacs were far more widely read and probably far more influential than even Jonathan Swift. And of such almanacs, authorities have estimated that between 3 and 4 million copies were distributed in England throughout this 17th century. And in that, almanacs of John Partridge was sold around 25,000 copies every year. So he was one of the most leading astrologer and almanac maker of this period. However, there was this prank. A prank almanac was written in the name of Isaac Bickerstaff, which caused a mayhem in 1708. And the actual author behind this pseudonym Isaac Bickerstaff was none other than Jonathan Swift. Why Swift chose to attack Partridge? Basically, it was because Jonathan himself was a clergyman in Church of England, and he was annoyed by the astrologers' attacks upon the church. And even this person, John Partridge, had predicted an epidemic which is going to happen in London, and he predicted that there will be something like death by raging fever. So, this work is a satirical attack under a pseudonym, Isaac Bickerstaff, against this unchristian act. Isaac, in biblical terms, it means laughter, and primary meaning of bicker is to skirmish or to exchange blows. So he takes this name to attack Partridge. So the name Isaac Bickerstaff then indicated that what the persona says will provide the laughter which Swift will use as a stout stick with which to exchange blows with Partridge. So that is why he chose this name, and this is why he chose to attack Partridge. So this was mainly attacking a fraud using a fraud. And his main intention was to embarrass Partridge and to completely discredit Partridge. The prank started in 1708. In 1708, an almanac went on sale in London titled Predictions for the Year 1708, and it particularly used the style of George Parker, who was actually a rival astrologer of Partridge. And it laid the groundwork for an elaborate April Fool's Day. And it was mainly intended to attack John Partridge. And that particular almanac, that is, this predictions for the year 1708, predicted death of this astrologer John Partridge, that he will die by a raging fever. And this Bickerstaff, Isaac Bickerstaff, the writer of this prediction, he predicted that Partridge would die at exactly 11 p.m. on March 29 of that year. And Londoners were actually shocked. They were amused by this bold claim. Usually, almanacs won't make such bold claim. They won't give out all those clear dates. They usually purposefully used ambiguous statements, vague statements. So, this was the prank which started the whole series of pranks to follow. So, this prediction went on real rage, and Partridge himself came out vehemently opposing this prediction. And London, held its breath waiting to see who would be proven right. So they were actually waiting for this day to come to see whether this prediction will come true. So all the Londoners were actually waiting for this day to come. And what happened on March 29? On the night of March 29, Bickerstaff issued an elegantly printed black framed elegy announcing that Partridge had died. And on March 30th or 31st, an anonymously penned pamphlet was also circulated around London titled The Accomplishment of the First of Mr. Bickerstaff's Predictions. And in that, he declared that Bickerstaff's prediction had come true, but noted that its timing had been off by 4 hours, as Partridge had died at 7:05 p.m., not 11 p.m. And on April 1st, everyone in London believed Partridge was dead. Even after Partridge came out alive, none believed him to be alive. And there was this gravedigger, Sexton, who arrived at Partridge's house asking about his funeral requirements. And it was reported that he looked exactly like a deceased acquaintance. And Partridge, later, to prove himself to be alive, he published a pamphlet and later his almanac for 1809, in which he had to insist that he was still alive and that Bickerstaff was a fraud. And that is when Bickerstaff responded back with this particular essay, A Vindication of Isaac Bickerstaff. So it appeared in April 1709 and it presented mock arguments. And here, Bickerstaff abandons all attempts to further the hoax. He brings it to a complete closure to the point that he proves the point that Partridge is dead in this essay. So let us move into the essay. Here Swift begins his essay by ridiculing Partridge's rough manner and the abusive language he used in his almanac, which came as a reply to Bickerstaff. Accordingly, he writes, "To call a man fool and villain and impudent fellow only for differing from him in a point mere speculative is, in my humble opinion, a very improper style for a person of his education." And here, Swift then directly attacks Partridge's defenders, namely His Majesty of Portugal. And here he states that his predictions were burned and destroyed in Portugal, but were treated with candor and generosity in other states of Europe. Here Swift says that it indicates the deplorable state of learning that existed in Portugal. Then he provides more instances of learned and courteous correspondence that he had received from other illustrious persons, which stood in stark contrast with those of Partridge. And thus, he openly expressed his condemnation against Partridge's impudent reply. And Swift states that Partridge himself had not raised any objections regarding the truth of his prophecies, but has actually proven how people can be so thoroughly blinded by prejudice. And here, Bickerstaff tries to dismiss particularly two objections that Partridge had been leveling against him. So, this was the first objection. The first objection claimed to have been made by a Frenchman, which he rejects on the ground of political and religious reasons. He says that English people would never believe a Frenchman who is a papist and an enemy of England. Rather, they would support him who is true to his government. And then he gives out different arguments to prove his point that Partridge is dead. So, this is the first argument. He says, above 1,000 gentlemen having bought his almanacs for this year, merely to find out what he said against me. At every line they read, they would lift up their eyes and cry out betwixt rage and laughter. They were sure no man alive ever read such damned stuff as this. Neither did I ever hear that opinion disputed, so that Mr. Partridge lies under a dilemma, either of disowning his almanac or allowing himself to be no man alive. So here, Partridge is proven to be dead. He brings out this point that Partridge is not alive anymore. Bickerstaff attempts to prove that his prophecy was right and that Partridge is not alive. First, he argues that no man alive will make such wretched statements as those of Partridge. And on reading such damned stuff, his supporters would lift up their eyes and cry out with rage and laughter. And now, this person, Partridge, is left with only two choices, either of disowning his almanac or allowing himself to be no man alive. So here Partridge is left with only one choice actually, that he should accept this fact that he is not alive. So that is the first argument. In the second argument, this is what Isaac Bickerstaff says. Mr. Partridge pretends to tell fortunes and recover stolen goods, which all the parish says he must do by conversing with the devil and other evil spirits. And no wise man will ever allow he could converse personally with either till after he was dead. So here he asserts that, Bickerstaff asserts that the whole parish believe that Partridge's gift of telling fortunes and recovering lost goods is mainly due to his association with the devil and other evil spirits. No man alive, according to Bickerstaff, no man alive could converse personally with evil spirits. Therefore, it proves the point that Partridge is dead. So that is the second argument. In the third argument, he quotes Partridge himself. He says, Partridge says he is not only now alive but was also alive on the very 29th of March, which I foretold he should die on. By this, he declares his opinion that a man may be alive now who was not alive a 12-month ago. And indeed, there lies the sophistry of this argument. He dares not assert he was alive ever since that 29th of March, but that he is now alive and was on that day. I grant the latter, for he did not die till night, as appears by the printed account of his death in a letter to our Lord. And whether he is since revived, I leave the world to judge. So he brings out this third evidence to confirm Partridge's death. And it is mainly based on the latter's argument, on Partridge's argument, where he claims that he is not only now alive but was also alive on the very 29th of March. So here he discusses the sophistry or falsity of this argument. He points out that Partridge never asserted that he was alive ever since that 29th of March. Instead, he claims that he is now alive and was on that day. So here, Bickerstaff does not dismiss Partridge's claim and admits that Partridge did not die till the night of 29th March, as stated in the latter's letter to our Lord, but in the predicted time. Here, Bickerstaff goes on to say whether he has since revived is a matter of contention, and he leaves this matter to the readers to ponder upon. Now he moves to the fourth argument. He says, Fourthly, I will appeal to Mr. Partridge himself, whether it be probable I could have been so indiscreet to begin my predictions with the only falsehood that ever was pretended to be in them. And this in an affair at home where I had so many opportunities to be exact, and must have given such advantages against me to a person of Mr. Patron's wit and learning, who, if he could possibly have raised one single objection more against the truth of my prophecies, would hardly have spared me. So here he directly addresses Partridge, and he makes his final argument to justify himself. He simply asks this question, how he can begin his career by making such false predictions, especially when he has many opportunities to be exact. Moreover, he says it would be inane to make such false predictions about a man of such learning, patronage of wit and learning, who could have possibly raised one single objection against the prophecy made by Isaac Bickerstaff. And then he goes on. After giving a series of logical explanations to justify the fulfillment of this prophecy, Bickerstaff then addresses one common objection against Patrick's death. He says that he still continues to write almanacs, but this is no more than what is common to all that profession. Gadbury, Poor Robin, Dove, Wing, and several others do yearly publish their almanacs, though several of them have been dead since before the Revolution. So, according to Isaac Bickerstaff, this is a common practice. All other authors continue to live through their works, but this is not the case with almanac makers. They are actually the registers of time. And once they are gone, their dissertations, their almanacs become useless. So, people, what they do is, the other people who belong to this profession, they publish almanacs under the name of the dead one. So, people tend to publish almanacs under the name of these popular almanac makers who are long dead and gone. So, thus, Bickerstaff effectively removes the final objection raised against his predictions. This particular essay, A Vindication of Isaac Bickerstaff, is charged with irony and banter and ends in a humorous tone. It ends like this: when the end of the year had verified all my predictions, out come Mr. Partridge's almanac disputing the point of his death, so that I am employed like the general who was forced to kill his enemies twice over, whom a necromancer had raised to life. So here he states that even if Partridge continues to live like a necromancer or a sorcerer, it does not contradict his predictions. He ends his essay clearly proved by invincible demonstration that Partridge died within half an hour of the time, as he has foretold, and he completely rejects all those malicious suggestions raised against him to blast his credit by charges of perjury. Partridge could have easily avoided the situation, the series of incidents. The mistake he did was that he took this fool seriously, this prank seriously. He took this whole madcap caper seriously. And that shows how foolish this person was. For any man to take seriously what was so obviously laughable, was so obviously a prank, show that he himself must be a ludicrous person. And now, who will credit him for what he has to say about either astrology or the Church of England? So, that is actually the method used by Jonathan Swift. Jonathan Swift knew from his experience in writing A Tale of a Tub that the most effective way of debunking a man and his opinions is to have him discredit himself. And here he completely succeeds in that point. He completely discredits Partridge. Here we should also add another point, that reputation of Partridge suffered only among the learned people. It is said that for many generations there existed a legend that company of stationers which published all almanacs, on hearing the report of Partridge's death, struck him from their list of writers. And even in some versions, it is said that Partridge himself appeared in person before these stationers and he failed to convince that he was alive. These are just legends, not truth. But it is true that Bickerstaff's letters surely had spawned off many ripples. But despite these, Partridge's almanacs were still popular among common masses. His reputation suffered only among the learned people. That actually shows the disconnect between literary world and masses. So that point is also to be noted. His reputation suffered only among the learned people. Almanacs were still popular among common masses, and particularly the Almanac of Partridge. This essay, Vindication of Isaac Bickerstaff, is a brilliant satirical attack on the popular malpractice of astrology of the time, casting all those unfounded prognostications. Here, Swift presents Partridge in the comic light and treats him in a humorous manner. And the main purpose of his sarcastic elements in this work falls into the same framework of his other satires, that is, to vex the world rather than divert it. So, here I end my lecture on the essay, A Vindication of Isaac Bickerstaff. I hope it is clear. Thank you.